Good morning. My name is Rich Sloma. Welcome to today's New York State Archives presentation of Ask Us Anything about processing and purging records. Today's presenters are Michael Martin, Maria McCashion, and Jennifer O'Neill. The session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. If you have questions, please type them in the chat box during the session. There'll be plenty of opportunities as we go through this particular session, and we will answer them. And now I will turn the presentation over to Michael.
Thank you, Rich. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we are fortunate enough to have two experts in records management who are my colleagues. I say that because, I know them both, but I also refer to them often when I am completely clueless and desperately need an answer. So, processing and purging records. We're going to talk about what exactly this means. Don't worry about that. But basically, we want everyone to know that these are, kind of steps in the records management lifecycle. We have the records, we want your records management program should plan something about the cycle. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So you have an idea of exactly what we're talking about in terms of the records. So you may wonder, where you even can start about transferring records, identifying things, organizing, applying retention schedules, all of those things. And what we hope is that you will have plenty of questions for us. So the whole idea is that your questions are going to, help determine our content, because what we have here is we are hoping that you will submit your questions in the chat box. That would be great. That's the main idea. Our experts are going to give you a basic idea of the process and purging of your records. And we do have some slides set up ahead of time. So, to help answer the most common questions. So even if you don't ask questions, there's a decent chance you're going to get an answer to something. But, we'll also answer some questions that we actually received ahead of time via email as well. But as we go on, we're going to take some breaks, for questions as they come up. So please submit them via the chat. And I want to make sure that I introduce the co-presenters, our panelists on this presentation, this training. We have Jennifer O'Neill, who is the head of our scheduling retention state agency services and retention scheduling unit. And we also have Maria McCashion, who is the records advisory for cities, and I want to say fire districts. There we go. I didn't want to say fire departments. I want to say fire districts for local governments in New York State for the state archives. So both of them will be answering your questions. And let us, one other thing. Retention questions, we get them all the time. We are happy to answer them. This is not the ideal time to try to answer specific retention schedule questions. We can talk about the retention schedule, but not necessarily specific items on the retention schedule. That'll take up a heck of a lot of time. And also it's very difficult to memorize the 400 and some odd pages of the retention schedule for the local government schedule and the general schedule as well for state agency. So we want to make sure that everybody can be involved. So we won't be addressing specific retention schedule item questions. If you have those, you can always contact either your records advisory officer or people in our scheduling unit if you're a state agency. So want to make sure that everybody will be involved with that. And I'll give that contact information at the end. Okay, so I think we're going to start with Maria with processing purging. So what is it and why do we need it?
Thanks, Michael. So processing and purging are steps that are essential for managing our records. The term processing can be used to describe different activities needed to manage records.
Hey, Maria, I'm
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you, but your volume is low. Is there a way that you can adjust that?
Maybe it's my headset. Is this better?
That's better, yes.
Okay, I didn't have it down near my mouth. Okay, Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the term processing. It can be used to describe different activities needed to manage records. It's often used to describe separating records that you need to keep from those that you no longer need because they've met their retention requirements, and then purging or weeding them and destroying them, and then organizing the remaining records for storage and access. And those remaining records may have short or long-term retention, or they may be permanent. So could we go to the next slide, Michael? So different types of records processing can occur at different stages of the records management life cycle. At creation, you might process records to determine that what they are and to set up a good filing system. When you're no longer using the records in your office, it can involve preparing those records to move them to another location for storage for the remainder of their retention period, and simultaneously identifying any records that are already in storage that may be obsolete and preparing those for disposal. It can also involve reviewing and weeding records like case files, like student or personnel files that might have a mix of records with different retention periods, which may include short-term or permanent. And the result may be that most of the records in the file are purged and the remaining are rehoused and labeled as permanent. It can also involve appraising records for historical value and making determinations about records that have historical value and should be kept. So why do we need processing and purging? We need it to weed out records that we no longer need so that we can easily find, use, care for, and access the records that we do need to keep. We need to do it to maintain our record storage areas, both physical and online. And we need it to make our work easier by maintaining a system to keep our records identified and organized. And if we could go to the next slide, I just want to briefly talk about a tool that supports processing and purging, and that's a records inventory. So if you don't already have an inventory of your records, developing one is going to make processing and purging records a lot easier in the long run. So a records inventory describes records at the record series level. And by record series, I mean records that are used together to support a specific government function, like a fiscal function or an administrative function. And specific record series may be all your vouchers or all your meeting minutes. Inventory information is collected on each record series using a standard inventory form like the one pictured on the slide. That's the State Archives inventory data worksheet. You could use a form like that, or you could use the same fields in a database. And the data you collect includes information on what each record series is, the date span of the records, their minimum retention requirements, and schedule information. And all of that information is information that you need to know in order to process and purge your records. If you don't have an inventory of records, then collecting inventory information as you process and purge your records will provide you with a foundation to manage your records on a regular cycle going forward. And I'll point out that the State Archives has free inventory tools like the form on the slide. We also have a free inventory database, and you can get details on those from your records advisor. Should I address the questions that were sent to us first, Michael?
That would be great, Maria.
Okay, so this was one to us from a local government. When is a digital copy of a file sufficient? So short answer is a digital file is sufficient when the record it contains can be maintained in its entirety for the record's full retention period. So state agency and local governments records, particularly if they are permanent, either born digital or scanned permanent records, need to be stored, documented, protected, and maintained with a migration plan following the regulations of the Commissioner of Education. Just want to point that out because it's important. You've got regulations that you need to follow if you're going to maintain that digital record. State agencies and local governments and any vendors involved, if you happen to be scanning records, should follow industry standards and best practices for creating, storing, and managing those scanned government records. And we have guidance on digital records creation, and storage in the State Archives Digital Imaging Guidelines, which are available on our website. We also have guidance on creating a strong contract if you're using a third-party vendor, such as the BOCES or a private vendor for record storage. And that guidance includes considerations to develop a contract with the vendor in order to protect your records, ensure their access, make sure that you can get them back in a usable format if you're not working with that vendor, and other things. As long as your organization understands and follows state regulations and guidelines, then records that are created in a digital format or scanned to a digital format should be sufficient. In addition, your organization may want to consider passing a resolution acknowledging that the digital copy of the record is the official record copy. And do you want to read the next one, Michael?
Certainly. So what is the best way to handle documents that may be redundant, maybe between departments, planning and building, for example?
Okay, so sharing one digital copy in one shared system may be the best way to address this issue. So you may want to set up a system following the guidance that I just described for digital, either image creation or born digital record storage and maintenance, and maintain and manage one digital copy of the shared records. So your information could be looking at the system that created the records initially to determine whether or not that system could maintain the record for its full retention period, and you could share access to that system. You could also, if this system that created the record can't maintain it for its full retention period, you could look into possibly migrating the digital record out of that system, storing it on a shared network, or possibly a system like a document management system or an electronic content management system, and then providing shared access to those systems.
Okay. So the next big question is, how should I store inactive paper records?
That one's mine too. Okay. So the image on the slide shows best practice for storing inactive paper records, and it's also the most cost-effective and efficient way to store paper records. That image shows the use of 18 gauge or lower complete metal shelving units that fit the boxes snugly. The shelf base in this image is 42 inches wide, so you can fit the boxes and their lids right next to each other with no gaps. Also the use of standard boxes, as you can see, standard labels, and also consistent information on those labels. So information like the creating department, the record series, the date range of the records in the box, and also information either the destroy date or permanent if the records happen to be permanent. It's also important to have an organized filing system that includes box location information, and that information could be part of your records inventory or a separate locator indexer system. You could set up a shelf numbering system, or you could use barcodes. You should also maintain the room with annual processing and purging, and support the whole operation with policies and procedures that staff should follow. And those procedures can include things like preparing the records for storage. Which boxes do I use? What do I put on the labels? also how they can access the records once the records are in storage, and also any instructions for how to prepare and store permanent records.
Okay, one more question, and then we actually do have a couple of questions that came in. So why don't we address this one first, and then we can address the ones that have come in. How should digital files be stored?
Well, this is one I was covering too. State agencies and local governments are required under the same regulations that cover the creation and maintenance of electronic records. Um, they must include records retention requirements in any system that is storing electronic records, so that non-permanent records can be destroyed regularly and permanent records can be protected. So just like those labels on the boxes you just saw, you want to incorporate information into your filing system, like information on the creating department, the record series, the date information, and even retention information. The example on the slide is a file and folder system that could be set up on a shared network. But you want to make sure that you're using standard naming conventions, applying those to a series of folders and subfolders, adding indexing wherever possible, also using the search tools that are part of your browser, and maybe considering if you have a large quantity of digital records that you're going to be storing, implementing something like a content management system as a central repository for all different types of digital records, whether they're born digital or scanned. And you can use the same terminology as you see on the files and folders on the slide. You could use those as index terms for a system like a content management system.
Sounds good. Okay, so here are two questions that just came in. Does each digital file require a resolution, or can we just do a blanket resolution for all?
Well, yeah, I'll take that one too. Yeah, you can, yeah, it should be a blanket resolution. And we do have a sample, which you can take a look at and see if it suits your organization. That's available on our forms and tools page in the records management section of our website.
Okay, and this is kind of a comment, but you said that the board may want to pass a resolution declaring the digital copy as the official copy. Is that optional since you said may?
Yeah, you could document that in policies, in a policy too. It doesn't have to be a resolution, but it needs to be, particularly if the records are permanent and they exist as in a digital format, that would be one good way to follow regulations and provide some sort of documentation on those records.
Okay. One more question just came in. Do you have best practices for naming folders? Jennifer, would you like to take this one?
Sure. So you can see on the screen that Maria has given a good example. It's important to have information in the file name that makes sense to you and your colleagues. So in this example, she has, it mentions board minutes. Looks like it's filed under the department folder to which it pertains. And she's clearly got it marked with what the final disposition of the records are. So it says perm for permanent. She's also indicated the dates of the minutes. If these were records that should be destroyed at some point, then it's a good idea to put in a date so that you're able to easily calculate the retention period of those records, and that helps to facilitate final disposition of the records. We do have some more specific webinars available on our website. you'll want to look for our file plan webinar. That probably has the most detailed information about file folder naming and setting up folder structures.
Okay, before we move on to the next section, because we just had another digital question, do digital copies have to be in a certain form? For example, is PDF allowed?
I can field that question. I
Okay.
just fielded a question like that earlier this morning. So we have digital imaging guidelines that we strongly encourage local governments and state agencies to use. They're available on our website, and it specifies what file formats have long-term availability. So we would prefer that PDF-A, which the A stands for archival, as a standard format for textual formats. Oh, thanks, Sarah, for sharing the link. Um, and TIFF formats can be used for image heavy graphics formats. The guidelines also lay out resolution and other important information, and they serve as a great spec sheet to provide to a vendor or someone in your office if you're doing in-house scanning. They're great guide to follow.
Can I add something to that, Jennifer?
Sure.
A PDF, a standard PDF is acceptable according to the digital imaging guidelines if the retention period of the record is 10 years or less.
Thanks for specifying that.
Yes, it's a very popular option for lower retention records.
Yes.
Okay,
Of which we have many.
yes. So now we're going to talk about retention and disposition of the records. Okay. So first question, what is a retention schedule? Jennifer?
Yeah, so a retention schedule is basically a plan that indicates the minimum amount of time you need to keep a record and then what should happen to that record once the retention period has been met. For most records, the final disposition is going to be to destroy records. There's a very small percentage of records that have long-term historical value and are indicated as permanent in the local government schedule or should be transferred to archives as it indicates in the general schedule for state agencies. Um, when, as I mentioned, the state archives has issued a local government retention schedule. You'll see the cover of it on your screen. And we've also issued for state agencies the what we call the general schedule. You'll see the cover of it on the next slide. But for state agencies, we also have agency-specific schedules. We also call them RDAs that pertain to unique records that an agency may produce. And when we develop those retention schedules, we make sure that the retention periods in them are long enough to satisfy any administrative, fiscal, legal, or historical requirements. And we work very closely, as you know, with state agencies and local governments to establish those retention periods. We try to develop our retention schedules so that they cover a wide array of formats. We try not to write them so that they are paper specific. There's no mandate that you have to dispose of records at the end of the retention period, but we really strongly recommend that if you don't dispose of the records, you really should carefully think through the risks of not destroying them per the retention period, and you should document that change in writing. Next question.
Why should I use a retention schedule? Oh, and there's the state general schedule image. There we go.
Yes, so this is, as Michael mentioned, the general schedule for state agency records. So there's a variety of good reasons to use a retention schedule. I think first and foremost is that in order to legally dispose of a record, specifically to destroy a record, you need to follow a state archives issued retention schedule. Otherwise, you have to hold on to that record, until you adopt the schedules. It Retention schedules also ensure that you keep records as long as required for administrative, legal, and historical purposes. As I noted, we vet the retention schedules when we issue them to make sure that they've met those requirements. We've also carefully considered the minimum retention periods so that you can destroy or dispose of records, so you don't have to keep them any longer than you need to. If you follow retention schedules, you're able to reduce the bulk of your records so that you improve records retrieval. It makes for fewer records to have to sort through. The fewer records you have, the more money you can save and space in terms of storage costs, and for lost time in trying to retrieve and find records. Getting rid of records also allows you to avoid lawsuits, and I should say by getting rid of, you're following the retention schedules. It allows you to avoid having to handle legal issues, FOIL requests, and e-discovery as you have legal authority to destroy those records and get rid of those obsolete records. So in general, applying retention schedules makes your work easier by helping you to keep your records organized. Next question.
Sounds good. All right. So how do I use a retention schedule or the different schedules that there are?
Sure. So this is actually could be interpreted a couple of different ways. So it could be interpreted as, how do I apply retention schedules to records? So, as Maria mentioned, you want to use when you have your records, create your records inventory, you'll want to apply your retention schedules to that inventory. So once you've been able to apply the retention schedules to the records in your inventory, it will tell you how long you need to keep those records and whether you can destroy those records or those records should be transferred to the state archives or kept permanently. It will allow you to separate records into different categories. Are the records obsolete, so they've met the retention period and can be disposed of? Maybe you'll find that the items are not in the retention schedule, so that may mean that they're not records and thus they don't need to follow the retention schedule. They can just be destroyed right away. Duplicates would fall into the category of non-records, and you can purge those out of your folder, your box, whatever you have your records stored in. And then, you'll want to document disposition of the records, and we'll talk more about documenting disposition later on. You could also interpret this question as, how do I actually use and look up items in the retention schedules? So we do have indexes in both the LGS 1 and the state general schedule, which if you have a paper version or a PDF version, you can use the index. And for the LGS1, we also have a really handy online search feature, which makes it really easy to look up items. Both schedules are also broken up into functional sections, so it should make it easy to try to pinpoint where you might find a particular record. If you want more information about using retention schedules, check out our publication on retention and disposition of schedules for more information.
Okay. I jumped ahead a little bit. The next big question, how should I destroy my government or my agency's records?
Okay, so the archives does not require that records be destroyed by a particular method. However, we do provide guidance, and I'll provide guidance here on how best to destroy records. And we develop this guidance based on the type of media you have and the sensitivity of the records contained within, or the information, I should say, contained within the records. So for paper records, if the records don't contain any kind of confidential information or information that might embarrass you if it got out, you can simply put paper records in the regular trash or recycling. If the records contain confidential or sensitive information, you should consider shredding the records. If you have a small quantity of records, you may want to purchase a shredder and shred them in-house. If you've got a large quantity of records, you could hire a shredding vendor to do the shredding on-site or off-site. The state archives has a confidential state waste paper recycling contract that state agencies and local governments can take advantage of, especially those who are in the Capital District or in the Utica area. Basically, our vendor will, in some cases, pick up, or you can drop off records and they will shred them for free. There may be other vendors out there that for a fee you can pay for if you're outside of those two areas. If you have microfilm, that can be pulverized or shredded. If you've got master microfilm, you can recycle the silver content. For electronic records, ideally, you should be thinking about disposition when you are designing your system. A lot of systems these days allow you to tie in retention schedules and excuse me, help you automate retention and disposition of records. There's other ways, especially if you have electronic media, or if you have a hard drive, you can physically destroy those that equipment, and that will be the surest way to eradicate electronic records. There's recycling vendors out there that provide such services. You can do degaussing, which involves exposing electronic media or hard drives to strong magnetic fields, which effectively erases the data. Probably most people or more people use overwriting or scrubbing, which is basically a software that you use to overwrite or scrub data, which essentially mixes up the pattern of data and makes it inaccessible to people. Next question.
Certainly. So, what documentation do I need to keep for records that I destroy?
Sure. So you'll see on the screen, we have developed a sample records destruction authorization form that's available on our website, and I'm sure Michael can probably pop a link to it in the chat. We really strongly recommend that you document records destruction. You'll want to do it at the series level, not the individual document level. Um, it's great to keep a record of this so you can keep track, but also to protect you should anyone question, like, well, why did you destroy those records? On the form, you'll see that it gathers basic information, the record series title, the date range, the schedule item that's pertinent, and the retention period. It's a good idea to have some sign-offs to make sure that the destruction was legally authorized. So consider having someone like your RMO or your department head sign off. And if you want to have a witness sign off as well, or a third party, you can certainly do that also. For state agencies who store records at the State Record Center, the disposition notice that you receive from them can serve as documentation that the records were destroyed or transferred to the archives. Next question.
Well, we're actually at a good stopping point before we get into the processing of the records. We had a few questions that came up. So one of the questions is, are there any guidelines or regulations for doing volume shredding of confidential records in-house?
Well, I can address that.
Okay.
The answer is no. We don't have, we don't tell you how to destroy your records. If you have a large volume, it may be more economical to use a vendor than to shred those records in-house, because it can be quite time consuming and can also create a lot of dust.
Another question, this is very specific, but if we are in Albany, who should we call to destroy our records? We've been using a paid service.
Yeah, so our confidential waste paper recycling contract is administered by Confidata, and you can find contact information for Confidata and information about the contract on the State Archives website. I can put a link in the
Actually, Monica put a link in the
It's
chat
already
box.
there.
Perfect,
Thank you.
perfect.
Thanks, Monica.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Monica. So yeah, just contact Confidata. If you have a large enough load, they may come and pick it up right from your workplace. If not, you can drop stuff off at the State Records Center. We'd be happy to take it there. Or, contact your records advisory officer and they can probably give you some other options.
Okay, one last question before we move on. How long must we keep the records destruction authorization forms?
Yeah, so I just looked this up and at least in the state general schedule, and I think we have the same exact retention period and item in the local government schedule. It calls for destruction of records disposal files 3 years after final disposition of records. So in the state general schedule, the item number is 90347.
Oh, in the LGS one, it's a 6-year record.
Okay.
And it's under archives and records management. I don't know the specific item number, but it should be easy to follow because that's a nice to find because that's a short section. But it is, I'm sure that it's a 6-year record in the LGS one.
Okay, and the distinction might be because sometimes for fiscal related records, it's a 3-year for state agencies and a 6-year for local governments, and that's just because of fiscal audit requirements.
Okay, so we'll enter into the next session for processing records. Okay, first question, how should I prepare records for inactive storage?
Um, oh, that was my slide. Sorry
Yes,
about that.
no worries.
Um, okay, so the first thing you want to do is you'll want to put your records in a box if they're not already in a box. And we strongly recommend that you purchase standard cubic foot boxes so that they fit on the type of shelving that that Maria was talking about earlier. At the Record Center, we prefer triple corrugated cardboard boxes because we found that they're sturdy and they last a long time. These triple ply boxes are available on state contract from the New York State Industries for the Disabled. So check out their website to purchase them. In this example, you'll see that it's a Staples box. Staples boxes, I think, are only double ply or single ply, and they're not going to hold up very well. So don't use those. When you are boxing your records, make sure that you weed out and dispose of non-records, such as duplicate copies and blank forms. Um, you'll want to keep the records in the same order as they were in your active filing cabinet or system. It's okay to keep the records in manila folders that will help to preserve the order and organization. Remove all non-recyclable materials such as binders and hanging file folders. Those are the bane of our existence at the Record Center. You'll see here in this image, there's a binder and you can see that it sticks up above the top of the box. So that means that the lid can't fit properly onto the box. So, please make sure you remove them. They're also not, they will damage any shredders if you try to put them through, even the commercial large scale shredding machines. If you have records that you need to continue to use, but you want to save a space in your box, put in a charge out card and make sure that you leave enough room so that you can return that folder to the box. Limit the amount of material you put in the box. You'll want to make sure that you can get your hands in both sides of the handholds so that you and others can very easily carry the boxes. Limit the contents of each container to records that became inactive within 1 year of each other. This is really important because it helps to facilitate the destruction of records to make sure that all records can be destroyed all at once. So, if the retention period comes up at the end of 2025, you want to be able to just get rid of that whole box instead of taking out a folder here or there. And don't overfill a box. Save your colleagues' backs. Make sure that the boxes are not over 35 pounds each.
Sounds good. All right, let's see. Our next question is for Maria. What information do I need about the folders or items in each box?
Hey, before I answer that, when Jennifer said that she reminded us that New York State Industries for the Disabled are preferred source for record storage cartons, The person who asked for about shredding, they're also preferred source for shredding. So if you were looking for a vendor for your shredding, you could contact New York State Industries for the disabled. There might be a vendor in your area. Then you wouldn't have to bid for that service. So regarding the folders, though, the folders inside a box should have clear, accurate, meaningful, and a brief statement about the contents of the folder. They may already have labels that exist from a filing system set up by the creating department in order to access those records in their office. And as Jennifer mentioned, you would want to maintain the organized filing system that was set up in that office within the boxes. Maybe those folders may span across a couple boxes, but you do want to keep the original order in order to ensure access when the records are in storage. When you're transferring records to storage, a container or a folder list can help you maintain easy access to the files in the box and also determine what's in the box or the folder if you need access to those records later on. So for example, you could prepare folder lists for records with long-term or permanent storage retention. You could put a list with the box, but you could also keep a list either on your computer or in your office so that if you need to access those records later on, you can get right to the specific box or folder in order to use those records. Details on the description on the folders are going to vary, but you do want to make it as descriptive as possible. So instead of just putting bills on a folder, you might want to put more specific information, like these are credit card bills from 2019 to 2024. That's good for access, and it's also good for determining when the records can be disposed of. State agencies who use the State Record Center are required to prepare transfer lists for transferring records to the state archives. And a form like that, so a records transfer form might be helpful for a local government to use in order to create procedures for how they want individual departments to document the records that they're transferring to storage.
Okay. We actually did get a couple of questions, so I'm going to read those off now. This one I'm not sure we're going to be able to answer because it's more about court records, but after placing court records, vehicle and traffic with a 6-year retention into electronic system, they have reached their destruction period. Are we allowed to remove them from the electronic system at this point, or do we need to contact the courts for permission again?
Yes, you do need to contact the courts. So the Office of Court Administration, either Jane Chin or Chloe Edwards Stowe, depending upon where you are.
Okay. Another question that came up, what if the boxes have some water spots on them? Will they be rejected?
I'm not sure if you are talking about will they be rejected from being from the State Record Center taking them. If they're water spots, they don't affect the integrity of the box. They're no longer wet, like there's no mold, anything like that. That's fine if there's a few water spots on them. You know, we just want to make sure that there isn't any mold that the records might have been exposed to inside the box. I think that's our most of our concern.
And I would think the concern of vendors as well.
Mm-hmm.
And one more question, and I think we actually answered this. Is there a recommended maximum weight for a box?
Yeah, we generally say no more than 35 pounds.
There we go. Okay, so our next question is what information should I put on my boxes? Jennifer?
Yeah, so you'll see on the screen 2 different methods, I guess you could say. So for the State Record Center, we require that state agencies provide minimal information on their box, and that's for security reasons. You know, we have over 250 or 200 over 200,000 boxes stored in our warehouse. So, you know, we want to make sure that there's not information on it screaming, these are birth records, or, you know, some other sort of sensitive records that may be stored there. Um, so you will see that we have barcode labels that we issue to state agencies, and we have agencies put them on the end of the boxes. The best place is under the handhold. As a kind of a backup system, we also have agencies put their agency code. So it's a 2-digit code. You'll see on here it's 59. Their transfer list number and box number. So this would be probably like box 7, it says. So it's probably 7 of a bunch of other boxes within one series. We primarily rely on the barcode label, but if the barcode label falls off, we have this written information that helps us to identify to what agency the box belongs and what transfer list to look it up on. On the example on the right, that comes from a fire district. And you'll see that that has a lot more information that is on the box. That's perfectly fine. This is probably a more modest size storage area, so it probably makes sense for more information to be put on the box because there might not be you know, a more sophisticated tracking system involved. So you'll see that they have put on information like what department it relates to, the number of what the box number is, brief description of the contents, the date ranges of the records, what the destroy date is, or if it's permanent, and you'll see this one's permanent, and any notes. Um, some other examples that we've seen over the years as sometimes governments use color coding to indicate like maybe red is these are permanent records. So it's very visible that the records should not be destroyed. You might have different color coding for various departments. So, you know, these are just examples. You can certainly use whatever, well, except for state agencies storing things at the record center, you can use whatever model you would like to use that works best for you.
Yeah, I'll just point out that this the label from Quorum Fire District, it is part of a database. So
Mhm.
a database generated the label, and that also maintains all this documentation in a system so that they can find their records.
Excellent.
Okay. Maria, how should I organize my inactive records?
Well, this is going to depend on your circumstances. A small organization might arrange boxes just by department or record series. However, if you do that, you want to set up a system that involves the least amount of shifting as possible, because that's just going to provide you with more work if you've got to constantly shift records. A small room could use a system like an alphanumerical system, and you could assign letters to shelving units and number the shelves, or vice versa. You could put numbers on the units and letters on the shelves, or you could number every shelf. I've seen some organizations that number every slot for the individual boxes. And to support all of this, you can use a database or an inventory and database, and include location information to help you identify the record's locations. And if it's part of your inventory, it can also help you find them for access and also determine, give you information about which ones can be disposed of. If you destroy a record in a system setup like that, then the location number can just be assigned to a new box of records going into that location. They're also off-the-shelf records management systems. We use one at the State Record Center to track locations, and also to use barcodes in order to track locations.
Sounds good. Okay. So Jennifer, how do I keep track of my records?
Yeah, and to add to what Maria was saying, at the State Record Center, we do random filing of records. So that is also another, it's good for security in that wherever there's a space on the shelf is where we put the next box that comes in. So that way we also don't have to shift boxes, to keep boxes together with other boxes. We just don't do that.
Right.
So you can keep track of boxes of your records. Most people, I think, do it by the individual box, but you could also do it by whole rows or units. If you have a modest size storage area, you may want to just stick with an easy sign out log. It's a low-tech method of tracking records. Could be a hard copy or something that is like a word process document. I think a lot of organizations have some sort of database. And we do have a sample database people can use for inactive records. I believe that it's available on our website, and I'm sure someone can stick a link in it. So you can use that database, modify it to your own situation. There's also, as Maria mentioned, there's off-the-shelf commercial software systems in place. We are actually transitioning to a brand new one at the State Record Center. So state agencies will have direct access to information on their records stored in storage at the record center. So that's something to look forward to in hopefully a couple of months.
Yeah, the locators. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that locator system that you mentioned is the same as the inventory database that I mentioned when we first started talking about an inventory. So that includes location information, and any type of a database can help you or enable you to do random filing, so you don't have to shift records. You can put them anywhere and find them with your database.
Yes, yes. No, good point. Also, a number of organizations also use barcoding. I showed you barcodes that we use at the State Record Center, and those usually tie into a database system. This reduces data entry errors and is really helpful when you have a large storage area. It can get a little pricey because you have to buy obviously equipment, barcode scanners, and things of that nature to support being able to do barcoding. There's also radio frequency ID or RFID. That is something that is used in more complicated storage facilities. I'm sure Amazon data or records distribution warehouses use RFID. I haven't actually seen any record storage areas that do this. Iron Mountain may do this. This is very expensive, but maybe as it gets adopted more, prices will come down, and it might be a viable option for governments to use.
Okay, we're running low on time because it's 11 o'clock, but want to make sure people know that we have resources available. There's the archives website. There's the publications we mentioned. Obviously, training and webinars like this one here. You can always contact the New York State Archives staff, whether that's your records advisory officer or the scheduling unit. Have contact on the next slide. And of course, network, talk with people who are going through similar problems. And we want to make sure we have the contact information. So state agencies, you can contact the Scheduling and State Agency Services. There's their email address. Your records advisory officer, they're broken up by your local government type. So as I said, Marie McCashion covers cities, fire districts, and New York City municipal agencies. Monica Hulk-Wheelton covers counties, libraries, and miscellaneous governments. Sarah Derling covers school districts, BOCES, community colleges, teacher centers. Myself, I cover towns. And Jamie Brinkman covers villages and Cornell Cooperative Extensions. Okay, and I think we just got one last question under the wire here. With random filling of boxes, is a database used to keep track of the empty spaces?
Yes, at the Record Center, our database system keeps track of when boxes leave a shelf so that we know that it's empty. And so, and we can run a report that shows us where all the empty spaces are, so we can put boxes that come in into those empty spaces.
Sounds good. And I just want to thank everybody for being here today, and especially Maria and Jennifer for answering these questions. Are there any additional questions just before we say goodbye to everyone? Someone's a huge fan of the Ask Us Anything format. We're happy to help. We'll have some more in the fall, I believe. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.